Kong, the eighth wonder of the world.
When King Kong was first shown in US theaters in 1933, it was a massive success to RKO Pictures, the company that both distributed and produced the picture. King Kong was also the brainchild of Merian Cooper, who was hired by RKO as an executive assistant to David O. Selznick, the company's vice president of production. Shortly before King Kong released, Selznick stepped down from his position and Cooper took over his role. Following the box office triumph of King Kong, Cooper suggested to the RKO board a follow-up picture called Son of Kong. RKO saw the dollar signs and approved of Cooper's Kong sequel, which wrapped up production within the span of 9 months and was released the same year as its predecessor. Though it did reasonably well, it couldn't come even close to the amount of success that King Kong made for itself. Cooper had intended Son of Kong to surpass the original in every way, but owing to financial and scheduling constraints, Son of Kong became a watered-down version of what Cooper dreamed it could have been. While King Kong is widely regarded as Cooper's masterpiece, he had much ambition to surpass that movie in every way. And in this episode of Road to Gojira, we're going to look into all the endeavors that led to the creation of the next King Kong. Following the mild success of Son of Kong, Cooper intended to make a third Kong movie, this time with Kong himself back in the action. To make this happen, Cooper had chosen to set the plot in between the events of Kong passing out from the gas bombs on Skull Island to his reveal in New York City. This seemed like the ideal opportunity to present a supplemental story that the fans of the original King Kong were never able to see. Since the first movie never explains any of the circumstances leading up to Kong's travels from Skull Island to New York, it seemed like the perfect place to set the story. The narrative would revolve around the Venture getting damaged and coming to an abrupt halt near an island in the Malay archipelago. While repairs are being made, ferocious creatures emerge out of nowhere and attack the surprised crew. In an attempt to counterattack, the crew releases Kong, who then fights off the creatures. Following the struggle, Kong makes his way into the forest, where he must be recaptured by Denim and the crew. Cooper was more than thrilled to expand on the story of Kong. However, others did not share that same enthusiasm for the project, such as Ernest Schoedsack, who had directed the previous 2 Kong movies. Cooper had chosen him to direct the picture, but Schoedsack was uninterested in the endeavor, since he believed that the King Kong concept had been run into the ground by this point. Not only that, but RKO also declined to provide funding for the picture following Son of Kong's unimpressive feedback. Cooper's third Kong film received 0 backing and was cancelled before it even got off the ground. Cooper retired from RKO Pictures in May 1934 and became vice president of Pioneer Pictures, a newly established film studio. Cooper and the Whitney cousins, John and Cornelius, formed the company in May 1933 with the intention of producing motion pictures with the new 3-strip Technicolor process. Cooper anticipated the company would advance innovations in the film business, thinking color movies were the way of the future. RKO and Pioneer Pictures signed a deal to release 3 Technicolor productions. Along with fulfilling his contractual duties to RKO, Cooper consented to personally produce 2 adventure films as part of a 2-picture agreement to RKO. With the 1935 premiere of Becky Sharp, the first full-length motion picture to be shot entirely in 3-strip Technicolor, Pioneer Pictures got off to a great start, with the result even attracting a lot of media attention. Cooper would also use the 3-strip Technicolor process to adapt both the Edward Bulwer-Lytton novel, The Last Days of Pompeii, and the H. Rider Haggard African adventure epic, She, both with a $1 million budget for each film. Screenwriter Ruth Rose would take over and pen the screenplays for both films, with Lansing C. Holden and Irving Pitchell directing She, and Ernest Schoedsack directing The Last Days of Pompeii. Cooper had hoped that these fantasy epics would surpass King Kong in scope, and just like in King Kong, these movies would have used stop-motion creatures as well as miniatures to help bring both fantasy worlds to life. Willis O'Brien and his team from the previous Kong movies would oversee the effects work for both pictures. While everything looked to be going well, Cooper had received disappointing news from RKO, that both films would only receive $1 million rather than 2 separate $1 million budgets. This news took Cooper entirely by surprise, especially because he had already progressed fairly far with the development of She. Everything had been severely thrown off track by this setback, and many things had to be omitted because the budget had been effectively cut in half. Both films had to now be in black and white instead of in Technicolor, and all the stop-motion creatures were removed. Although a saber-toothed tiger is still present in She, it is only depicted imprisoned within an ice wall. Both pictures would eventually see release in 1935, and both were financial failures. Cooper had conflicting feelings about the making of both films, particularly for the film She, which he had to cheat a lot just to get the movie made, and frequently claimed it as the worst film he had ever worked on. Cooper even went on asserting that if cost constraints had not interfered, both movies would have been commercial successes. Not one to wait for more work, Cooper assigned David O. Selznick, who was also employed at Pioneer, the responsibility of developing plot concepts for the company's next Technicolor film. Selznick had come up with a few ideas, one of those being a crossover between Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan and the formidable King Kong. Cooper was so taken back by the idea that he quickly got in touch with MGM, who at the time owned the rights to Tarzan, to arrange a deal for use of the character for their movie. Unfortunately for Cooper, MGM was not interested in negotiating a deal for the rights to the Tarzan character. In addition to this unpleasant news, Cooper also learned that RKO had asserted ownership of the King Kong rights. This revelation left Cooper perplexed and devastated, as he had always believed that he was the rightful owner of the King Kong IP, a topic that would only become more complicated with time. Since the project encountered numerous problems from the beginning, the crossover was abandoned before it even had a chance. However, the two jungle monarchs would eventually cross paths when publisher Atlas Press released a novel of the scrap story many years later in 2016. Going back to the late 1930s, Cooper became even more eager to produce an epic adventure film like Kong, particularly in light of King Kong's 1938 re-release, which was seeing great success in cinemas. Cooper had joined MGM at this point, having departed from Pioneer Pictures. In an attempt to cash in on King Kong's recent popularity, Cooper made the decision to create yet another grand adventure tale that featured enormous animals. This new story was called War Eagles. In a 1938 proposal, Cooper imagined that members of a forgotten tribe ride huge flying eagles in a warm volcanic valley 20,000 feet deep, amid the South Polar ice fields. The concept characterized their manner of life as being similar to heaven on a plateau, but they lack food and must fly their eagles into a lush prehistoric valley to replenish their supplies, which the production would later refer to as Valley of the Ancients. This valley is full of prehistoric terrors and is inhabited by a race of savage ape men, who trap creatures for their brutal arena fights and covet the women of the bird people to serve as sacrifices to their prehistoric monsters. The main character, who Cooper didn't name in his draft, was another one of his alter egos like Denham was in King Kong, this time being a hotshot aviator. One day while flying, the hero makes a daring gesture towards fate by flying across the globe and crashes within the Valley of the Ancients, where he is attacked by a carnivorous dinosaur, but is soon saved by a group of eagle-riding Vikings, led by a beautiful exotic woman. The Eagle Riders take the hero to their plateau, where he gets to experience their way of life and even gets to ride an eagle of his own. One day as the group are searching the valley for food, the woman is caught off guard and is taken hostage by the ape men, who bring her back to their lair to use as a sacrifice. The hero rushes to her aid with self-made bombs to counter the ape men and rescue her. Upon arriving back to the plateau, the hero gets word that his homeland is under attack by Nazi soldiers, who have constructed a superweapon that grounds all enemy aircraft. This prompts the hero to convince his new allies to aid him in defending his homeland, resulting in an intense showdown in New York City. The story recycles several aspects from King Kong, such as the protagonist's discovery of a mysterious dinosaur-filled location, his attempt to prevent a woman from being used as a human sacrifice, and the movie's climax taking place in New York City. Even our main lead is later named Jack in an early revision. Cooper thought the film would do better at the box office than King Kong, both in terms of revenue and appeal, on top of it also having the advantage of being in Technicolor. Naturally, Cooper had gotten in touch with Willis O'Brien to serve as the film's chief technician in order to bring the movie to life. O'Brien graciously accepts. As miniature sets and storyboards were being produced, O'Brien had a visitor walk in as he was working on the project, a 19-year-old boy named Ray Harryhausen. Harryhausen had gotten in touch with Obie through a classmate of Ray's. One day in high school, he glanced over at a book belonging to one of his classmates, which happened to contain an image of King Kong. The classmate turned out to be the daughter of Harry Redman, an O'Brien crew member who worked on King Kong. After Ray told her about his obsession with King Kong and the factors that created the giant, the girl saw his enthusiasm and told him,
"I heard O'Brien's at MGM. You should give him a call."
Ray took the girl's word and called O'Brien at MGM. After receiving Ray's call, O'Brien invited him down to MGM to visit him. Upon arrival, Ray was amazed at what he saw in the studio. 3 rooms with walls filled with dozens of sketches for War Eagles. O'Brien and his team of artists illustrated over 300 sketches, in addition to intricate illustrations and oil paintings. Upon meeting his hero, Ray was ecstatic. O'Brien made him feel welcomed by discussing stop-motion animation and the upcoming epic story of War Eagles. Ray was enjoying every minute of the moment. To show off his craft, he had brought along a briefcase containing his own models of dinosaurs, wanting to show and impress O'Brien. After presenting the models to him, Ray was met with some criticism for their anatomical errors. O'Brien thought the figure's legs were too short or their skin was too wrinkled, advising Ray to research appropriate anatomy and muscle structure in order to create proper models. Ray took the criticism to heart and later enrolled in night school at the Los Angeles City College to study art and anatomy. For Ray, his journey into the special effects film industry had only just begun. Back at MGM, the project for War Eagles appeared to have been going smooth, with several revisions to the story and many set pieces for the animation in place. However, after a year of pre-production and test footage, the project had to be put on halt when Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, plunging humanity into the abyss of the New World War. Cooper had left the project and re-enlisted into the Air Corps, suspending production of War Eagles. Obie was devastated that the project was put on halt since he had hoped to use his expertise to make sure the movie would have been as successful as Kong was years earlier. Even after War Eagles ceased operations, O'Brien was committed to using his stop-motion skills and had gotten in contact with RKO Pictures and producer John Spex, whom he had collaborated with on the last days of Pompeii, with a story concept that blended a dinosaur fantasy with a Western action tale. This new concept would be called Gwangi. The story is about a bunch of cowboys who find an Allosaurus that is residing in the Grand Canyon. They intend to exhibit the creature by roping it and capturing the beast, displaying it at the Wild West Show. After the dinosaur is showcased, a group of lions break out of their cage and attack the beast. The Allosaurus defeats the big cats and escapes from captivity, terrorizing the tiny hamlet in the southwest. Even if the premise was not as vast as King Kong was, O'Brien was still committed to create an epic fantasy adventure film. Unfortunately, as production began, O'Brien received some unexpected news. RKO joined the private sector bureaucrat collision, known as the Institute of Audience Opinion, in order to determine which of their movies being worked on should be abandoned or reworked. Gwangi unfortunately faced severe criticism from the union, starting with just the title, which proved to be difficult for the reviewers to pronounce. Viewers even agreed that no one would be entertained by a simple dinosaur movie, regardless if it was in color or not. RKO took the reviewers seriously and ultimately decided to scrap Gwangi. John Spex did all he could to save the project, but sadly nothing could be done, with Obie's dreams once again being crushed. Later on, some interesting Gwangi arose when Sid Rigel, an executive producer at RKO, showed interest in the project in 1943 and asked Ruth Rose to help write a story for it. In the end though, RKO chose to abandon the project completely. At the end of the war, the project known as War Eagles was completely dropped due to the critical plot element of American-German antagonism, which had now become dated. Some other sources say that both Cooper and Obie lost the will to make it after the war. The story of Gwangi would eventually come to fruition in 1968 by Warner Brothers, now renamed The Valley of Gwangi, and War Eagles would see a release in the form of a novel in 2008 written by Karl Maychek. Shortly after the war, Cooper expressed renewed interest in filming another gorilla film. Unlike King Kong, this ape would be more playful and docile, having been raised by a woman since it was a baby. The idea was somewhat based on a real-life incident described in Maria Hoyt's story, Toto and I, A Gorilla in the Family. A narrative about Maria Hoyt's adoption of a young gorilla that was left orphaned during a hunt in French Equatorial Africa. The concept would transform into the story known as Mr. Joseph Young of Africa. Although Cooper had shown interest in using a real gorilla for the film, he ultimately believed that a stop-motion puppet would be the more practical choice. Cooper called Obie asking if he would be interested in working with him on another ape film, similar to King Kong. After many years of unfulfilled endeavors and uninteresting jobs, O'Brien seizes the opportunity to work on a movie that will utilize his skills to the fullest. However, O'Brien would play a bigger role in constructing the story. Due to the bigger job O'Brien had to carry, he had gotten in contact with Ray Harryhausen to aid him with the film. Since their meeting at MGM, the two have remained in contact and had even collaborated briefly on one of George Pal's Puppetoons. Ray Harryhausen's passion for O'Brien's creations, as well as his own aptitude for stop motion, made O'Brien realize Ray's skills and extended an offer for Harryhausen to work as an assistant on a project that was similar to King Kong. Ray had joined the production firm in late 1945, though initially not for the work you may be thinking. Ray was essentially called in to assist O'Brien with mounting storyboards, cutting production drawing mats, sharpening pencils, and various other tasks. Though Harryhausen never complained about the work, he was just happy and thrilled to be working alongside his hero and mentor, Willis O'Brien, as well as honored to finally work on a feature film. Marion Cooper, Ernest Schoedsack and his wife Ruth Rose, as well as Willis O'Brien, collaborated on the gorilla story that went through many revisions. Obie had a number of inputs for the project, including Joe battling other animals in a coliseum, a scenario in which Joe and the protagonist have to defend themselves from a pack of lions on their way from Africa, and a fight sequence between Joe and another gorilla battling on top of a cable car down the streets of San Francisco. The majority of concepts came from Obie, but due to the high cost of producing such sequences, they were frequently rejected. Ruth Rose would eventually create the script for the film, and while many of Obie's suggestions were rejected, some did make it in the movie. After a series of back and forths, Cooper had finally secured the green light from RKO in late 1946 to begin production, on a $1.5 million budget. The same process employed to build Kong was also utilized to produce Joe. The armature was designed by Ray Harryhausen under the guidance of Willis O'Brien, using the skeleton of an actual gorilla as a model. To correct myself from earlier videos, Harry Cunningham was the individual who constructed the models for both King Kong and Joe, not Marcel Delgado, or at least that's what most sources say. As Cunningham states in the book Master of Hijinks, that he had machined the armatures for Joe rather than create them himself. It is thought that Cunningham may have had an associate build the models. Regardless on who produced them, they certainly got the job done, consisting of a metal skeleton with over 150 movable parts. Once the armatures were completed, Marcel Delgado and his brother Victor attached the body muscles to them, using cotton, dental dam, and foam rubber. The Delgado brothers created up to 6 different models of Joe, ranging from 4 to 15 inches in height, along with a few lions, horses, and human figures. Joe's fur was made from the hide of unborn calf. A taxidermist named George Lothgren developed a technique called pelt transfer, a method used to rubberize the wool for Joe's fur, as a means to keep it from moving around randomly like King Kong's fur was experiencing in his movie. As much as O'Brien wanted to animate, he only participated in a small number of animation sequences, because he had devoted much of his time on setups and planning out scenes. Ray Harryhausen would eventually take the stage to demonstrate his aptitude for the craft. In order to provide Joe with a reference, the production dispatched a cameraman to the Chicago Zoo to film and analyze gorilla behavior. The footage didn't help much. The gorillas didn't do anything but walk around, sit down, and pick their noses. Ray had to come to the realization that he needed to put himself into the motions of the character. Adding to this, Ray at times would act like a gorilla in certain circumstances, conveying emotion and displaying that in Joe. Ray combined more human characteristics with the fundamental gorilla mannerisms. Ray even paid tribute to King Kong by having Joe slam his fist on the ground, which was a callback to when King Kong did it once he opened the gates to Skull Island. Ray Harryhausen truly amazed O'Brien with his effort. He had done extensive research on gorillas and on O'Brien's past efforts. It's even said that Ray completed over 90% of the animation with little to no retakes. Staff member Pete Peterson would soon become a part of the animation team once he took an interest in Ray's work during the production, and contributed to a small number of scenes. All the effects and animation work took 14 months to complete. Cooper had also wanted the movie to be in Technicolor, but due to the movie's already high budget, the idea was soon abandoned. Though there would be one scene in particular that would experiment with some color footage, and I'll go more into this in the next video. The movie's title also went through several changes, going from Mr. Joseph Young of Africa to simply Mr. Joseph Young, then to The Great Joe Young, and finally Mighty Joe Young, which was released on July 30th, 1949. Given the success of King Kong throughout the years, the crew expected another massive hit. They believed they had produced the next Kong. Sadly, the film was a box office flop, and even went over budget. Reviews were favorable, but ultimately the film was deemed a box office failure. There were plans for a follow-up in which Joe would meet Tarzan. Financial issues on top of the disappointing box office run of Joe prevented the project from happening. Mighty Joe Young was regarded as a failure by many at the time. But did it really deserve to be? We'll find out next time in our next Road to Gojira, when I review Mighty Joe Young.